Hello and welcome, this is the Ch.1 Reads, and today I'm going to be reading The Dark Secret by Ch.1 Sutherland. Part 1, The Secret Plan, Chapter 1. Where is she? Starflight suspected that he might be dead, except that everything hurt so much. Darkness pressed against his eyes whenever he tried to open them. His nose and throat ached in a fierce raw way, as if they'd been scraped out with the crocodile tail. Is she alright? He couldn't remember what he dreamed and what was real. Perhaps he was still under the mountain. Perhaps his friends had never tried to escape their guardians. Maybe this was one long nightmare that had started with the threat of Marosir's visit. But Starflight was sure he could remember the large Nightwing taking him aside. There was a lecture about how Nightwings have a reputation to uphold, and Nightwings are natural leaders, and you must make the others respect you, fear you, and follow you, or you'll be the greatest disappointment our tribe has ever produced. Starflight couldn't have conjured that from his own brain. That was all real. He curled onto his side and felt jagged rocks press into his scales. Was the Skywing Palace real? The dragonets captured before even tasting sunlight. The prison on the Tower of the Rock. The baking hot arena sands that smelled of blood and terror. Queen Scarlet's delight at capturing him, a real Nightwing out in the world. And her plans to make him fight, and her excitement about the prospect of watching him die. No, that had to be real, because Starflight remembered being rescued by the Nightwings. He remembered watching his friends turn into small dots below him. Blue and brown and bright, and he knew it was real because it felt much like this felt, as if he were a scroll ripped in half down the middle, so none of the words made any sense anymore. Will I ever see her again? I hope she's not here. I hope she's safe somewhere. I think there's something wrong with him. Was that a voice? He tried to listen, but his dreams dragged him back down. There had been another stern lecture from Marosir. It was essential for Starflight to be the leader of the Dragonettes. Everything depended on him. And a new order. He must convince the others to choose Blister as the next Sandwing Queen. Maybe they killed him by accident. That'd be all right. Maybe I'll get to be in the prophecy instead. I don't think that's how that works, Fierce Teeth. And then there was the Kingdom of the Sea. No one would listen to him. He couldn't lead anyone. His friends practically laughed at him when he tried to support Blister. Another prison, another escape where Starflight did just about nothing to help. And then the rainforest, and the strange unnatural tunnels, one to the Kingdom of the Sand, and one apparently to the secret home of the Nightwings. That Starflight remembered. He remembered staring up at it, the dark hole in the tree that had led to a home he'd never seen. I bet he'd wake up if I bit him. I bet Marosir would throw you in a volcano if he found tooth marks on his prophecy pet. I bet my mom would have him for lunch if he tried. He was definitely hearing voices. Unfamiliar voices, very close by. The memory of the rainforest was blurring. Starflight tried to fix his mind on it, on those last moments, guarding the tunnel so that the Nightwings wouldn't come through and attack the Rainwings. What had happened? Well, he'd better wake up and be interesting soon, or Marosir will take him away again before we even get to ask him anything. Ooh, I have an idea. Claws scrabbled on rock, and then there was quiet. Starflight's eyelids felt too heavy to open, as if extra scales were piled on top of them. He let the darkness drift up over him again. Right, guarding the hole, with clay, morning sunbeams flickering through the green leaves, octopus blue flowers turning their heads up to the sunlight. Sunny was back in the village, with Tsunami, watching Glory try to become queen of the Rainwings of all things. Sunny had brought them food the night before, her golden scales brushing against his dark wings as she passed him. Strange little purple fruits. I love you, he would never say. Don't hate me because of what the other Nightwings have done. Don't think I'm like my tribe. Don't listen to Glory's description of my kingdom. The smoke and the fire and the smell of death, and the trapped tortured Rainwings and the cruel black dragons. Don't look at me like I'm one of them. Like I could ever do what they've done, please. And then she glanced up at him and smiled. And in Sunny's eyes, he could see himself as Starflight, just fine the way he was, her friend, which made everything better and worse all at the same time. Careful, I'm going back for some more if you spill it, idiot. Get your great honking wings out of my way then, fathead. The voices again. Starflight caught at the memories, trying to remember the last thing that had happened before everything went dark. He'd been staring at the hole, wondering what the other Nightwings were really like. Wondering if they were all as scary as Marosir, wondering if he went through and talked to them, whether they would listen. What if he could stop the Nightwings and the Rainwings from fighting? What if his tribe understood him and believed in him? What if they thought it was better to be smart than brave? What if they didn't care that he had no special Nightwing powers? What would Sunny think of me then? She'd probably think, "Who are you, and what have you done with Starflight?" Because there was no way he'd ever be brave enough to go through the tunnel on his own. And then Clay had yelped, "Did you see that? I think it was a boar. I'll be right back." And poor, ever-hungry Clay had charged off into the trees, leaving Starflight to watch the hole alone. In a heartbeat, dark wings had boiled out of the hole, dark claws had circled his snout, a dark voice had hissed in his ear. "Silence, if you want your friend to live." Another dark voice. Better safe than sorry. Although he hadn't made a sound, and he'd known it would hurt right before the blow struck his head, and pain blazed through him. And that was the last thing he... Splash! Starflight jolted up with a yell. His eyes popped open, freezing salt water cascaded over his snout and snaked down his neck, seeping into his scales. The muddled, heavy feeling vanished in an instant. "It worked!" cheering one of the unfamiliar voices. "Drat," said another. "I really thought he was dead." Starflight shook his head, and then pain ricocheted around inside. He rubbed at his snout, trying to clear the ocean water from his stinging eyes. 6 or 7, or maybe 8 dark blurry shapes surrounded him. Beyond them, glowing red light pulsed in lines along the walls. The freezing water had cleared his nose for a moment, but heavy smoky air was already pressing back in. "Who are you?" Starflight gasped, or tried to. "Huh, I thought he might attack us," said a third voice. "That's what I would do." "He doesn't look very dangerous," said another voice skeptically. "They should have picked someone bigger, don't you think? Bigger and scarier and fiercer." "Like me," said the voice who had hoped Starflight was dead. "You all have tiny Rangwing brains," said yet another voice. Starflight was losing count. He was still inside his egg when they took him. They didn't know if he'd be big or scary, or even if he'd be male or female. Otherwise, of course, they would have picked a girl, obviously. "Like me." "Hello?" Starflight coughed. "Hello?" One of the shapes came close enough for him to make out the features of the disgruntled-looking dragonette, a year or two older than himself. She poked at his mouth and peered at his teeth, jabbed at his chest so he coughed again, inspected his claws, and sighed huffily. "Weak," she declared. "I'd have sent him back too." "You're just saying that because you're hoping they'll pick you instead," said another dragonette, pushing forward. He patted Starflight's head in an almost friendly way. "But prophecies don't work like that." "We'll see," she muttered. "That's Fierce Teeth," said the friendlier dragonette to Starflight. "Don't mind her. Older sisters always think they can do whatever you're doing better than you can. I know, I've got one too. I'm Mighty Claws, by the way." "Older sister?" Starflight echoed, blinking at Fierce Teeth. "Yes, this is the touching family reunion part," she said. "Same mother, different fathers, we assume. How do you feel?" She eyed him from horns to tail. "Ill? Very ill? Dying, perhaps?" "What part of Brightest Night are you having trouble with?" said another dragonette behind Fierce Teeth. "Haven't you been listening in class? Events have to match the prophecies. Hi, strange dragon. I'm Mind Reader, but don't worry, I promise I'll stay out of your head." The older dragonettes in the room laughed uproariously, as if this was the most hilarious joke in pirate history. The 3 dragonettes who looked younger than Starflight rolled their eyes, like they were used to hearing jokes that made no sense from that group. Starflight rubbed his wet scales, confused. Now that his sight was clearing, he could see that he was in a long, narrow cave, lined with indentations in the rock, at regular intervals, all the right size for dragonette beds. He was curled in one of these, not far from the large archway that seemed to be the only exit from the room. Next to him, on the floor, was a large hollow stone, which is apparently what the dragonettes had used to collect the sea water they just poured all over him. It didn't look like a prison. It looked like a dormitory. Hot coals smoldered in the alcoves in the walls, lending a red glow to the room. A skylight at each end of the cave allowed a bit of dim gray light to filter in. There were at least 50 sleeping spots that Starflight could see, but only about 11 of them looked slept in. Several had rough blankets heaped on them in messy piles, while others were scattered with objects that looked like seashells and twisted bits of rock. A few of the blanket-covered beds had a scroll lying next to them, which made Starflight's claws itch with longing, but most of the beds were completely bare. Places for dragonettes, but no dragonettes to fill them. Starflight remembered something. Marzyr had said offhandedly, shortly after rescuing Starflight from the Skywings. He'd said, We can't afford to lose any Nightwings, even peculiar little ones. Maybe there's something wrong with my tribe, Starflight thought. Maybe they're losing dragonets somehow, or not having enough of them in the first place. Everything smelled like sulfur and decaying animals. As Fierceteeth leaned over and jabbed his stomach again, Starflight realized that a lot of the decaying smell came from the dragonets. They all had horrendously bad breath. Marasir's breath had never been wonderful either, but this was much worse. It took all of Starflight's willpower not to recoil when they spoke to him. They were also shockingly thin, every one of them, with narrow chests, bloodshot eyes, and hacking coughs. Even the dragonets who survived are in pretty bad shape, Starflight thought. He stretched gingerly, eyeing the door. It didn't seem to be barricaded in any way. As far as Starflight could tell, he could walk right out into the caves beyond. There's probably a guard, he thought. Or lots of guards. Or maybe something really creepy, like Queen Coral's electric eels. Or a lava river, like the one that keeps the rainwings trapped in their prison caves. A shiver of fear ran down his spine. Why am I here? He blurted. The little crowd of dragonets exchanged glances. Because you failed, Fierceteeth offered, I assume. We don't know that, Mighty Claws interjected. A couple of the big dragons dropped you off a few hours ago, and you've been muttering and thrashing around ever since. Yeah, a lot of worrying about Sunny. Who's Sunny? One of the dragonets demanded. Starflight considered throwing himself into the volcano. Another dragonet, he mumbled. I hope she's safe. I want to hear about the mainland, Mindreader said eagerly. Tell us everything. We've heard that there are trees taller than dragons, and that in some places the sky is blue. True? False? What's the coolest thing you've ever seen? What's the best thing you've eaten? You've never been to the mainland? Starflight said. Dragonets aren't allowed to leave the island until we're 10 years old, Mighty Claws said. Apparently we can't be trusted to keep all the Nightwing secrets until then. Almost in unison, all the dragonets snorted impatiently. You're the only exception, Fierceteeth said in a voice dripping with scorn. Him and the other one, Mindreader said. I heard my mom say there was another. I don't know any Nightwing secrets, Starflight said. Oh, said Mighty Claws. I guess that's one way to make sure you keep them. The scrabble of claws in the hall outside heralded the appearance of a dragonet smaller than the others, perhaps 3 years old. She raced into the room and gasped. He's coming! Immediately the dragonets scattered to their sleeping spots. Half of them dove into their blankets and pretended to be asleep. A few of them grabbed their scrolls and looked studious. Others fussed busily with the objects around their beds. Fierceteeth sat down on her bed, folded her wings, and glared at the doorway. Starflight wished he was unconscious again, as he heard heavy footsteps tramping toward the room. He glanced up at the skylight, wondering if he could fit through it, but knowing perfectly well that he was too terrified to try. With a scraping, hissing sound, Marasir slithered into the room. He frowned at Fierceteeth, then looked coldly down his long nose at Starflight. Up, he snarled. The Queen of the Nightwings wants to see you. And that is the end of Chapter 1. Once again, this is the 4th book in the Wings of Fire series by Ch.1 Sutherland. Have a great day.